Hello and welcome to Recipe for Revenue. This is our third episode now, and I'm excited to be here today with Bruce Schroder, this co-founder and CEO of Crave Kitchens. Bruce, I'm super happy to be here and talk with you today. You have a really interesting concept with Crave Kitchens, and I'm excited to share that with folks and give you a chance to tell us about your amazing career in the food and beverage industry and what you're doing now, because it's really in the cutting edge of the takeout world. So take a moment and introduce yourself.
Okay, cool. Well, hopefully third time's the charm here. It's a privilege to join this series. I watched a couple of the other ones and found them quite fascinating. So
Thank you.
anxious to contribute, and thanks for doing this for all of us.
Yeah,
So
my
appreciate that
pleasure.
very much. And yeah, like you said, I've been in the food and beverage industry almost my entire career, and if nothing else, have made every mistake along the way. And today, what hopefully I can do is help some others avoid those mistakes, because some of them are too painful to repeat. But
Sure.
certainly have learned a heck of a lot. And even though our industry isn't the most innovative out there, there's been more innovation in the last 3 years than we've seen in the previous 30. So it's very
Yeah.
exciting.
Yeah. And, obviously COVID had some part to do with that.
Yeah, it did.
Right?
Yeah, when I was in this space, namely the delivery online ordering space,
Mhm.
I remember sitting there pre-March, looking at a 38% adoption rate of online ordering, whether
Yeah.
you can believe that or not. And literally in the course of 2 weeks, it went from 38% to 100. And
Wow.
so we had to catch up in a hurry.
Yeah. Yeah. And lightning speed. It's
Yeah.
down to a completely different kind of demand. And I think, when we were working with clients in that period, they were coming to us and saying, how do we get our e-commerce store set up and running? And you're like, yeah, there's so many components of it. There's a technical side of building the store, but the whole distribution side, the fulfillment side,
Exactly.
you really have to think through all of that. So,
Yeah, the front end, shame on me for saying this, but the front end was relatively easy, right? We knew how to do that in e-commerce. It's the back end, it's the fulfillment that became the real challenge.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's kind of, tell us a little bit about your career path. You've started out, with PepsiCo. You've worked with some amazing brands, Peet's Coffee, Jamba Juice, Moe's Southwest Grill. So kind of take us along the story.
Yeah, I've been fortunate enough to be right place, right time in a lot of different really exciting brands. So it all started, actually, I'm a CPA by training, and got recruited at PepsiCo really quickly after I got my license to join Pepsi in finance, which was a weird entry point, but it was great because I wound up helping the operations group. At that point, this was when we were doing a lot of fountain vending and cranking out vending machines everywhere. And believe it or not, there were no controls in place, and so we lost a ton of equipment and had to write it off. So it was a real expensive problem that fortunately was able to help them fix it. And the guys in the sales and operations team were like, "You're not an accountant. You need to come over to our side."
They saw that talent. They said, "We need you."
Yeah, so I made that choice to quit counting beans and start making them. So that was a fun transition. In PepsiCo, I was there 16 years. They moved me 8 times. Probably had at least a dozen jobs. So talk about fertile ground for learning and experience.
Sure.
And they're one of those companies that give you a lot of experience early in your managerial lifetime. So it's put up or shut up. And so it was a fantastic place for me. And just to give you a sense of the diversity, just rolling through the Pepsi times, I started in the bottling group. And and back to fulfillment, learned all about distribution and fulfillment there. So first of all, the CPA has always served me well, because if you don't know your numbers, you're going to have to.
Yeah, it always comes back to the numbers regardless, right?
Yeah, so I would never not do that again. And then Pepsi taught me distribution, which has served me well again. But back then in the bottling group, we were buying all these. It was franchising. The bottlers were franchised, and during the course of Pepsi and Coke, both, they've gone back and forth between owning the bottling operations and franchising them. So it was an interesting period. But things got really exciting when they asked me to move over to Taco Bell. So this is back when Pepsi owned Taco Bell, and I may as well have gone to Goodyear Tire and Rubber. It was that different. than
Really?
Pepsi. Yeah. And well, first of all, the restaurant business is a lot tighter margins, right?
Sure.
So a lot more discipline, and really enjoyed learning that. And fortunately, again, I walked into a brand that was on fire. This is all the way back when Taco Bell, first did the value menu, which
Okay.
we went from the sleepy Mexican concept to one of the dominant QSRs. And
Sure.
our vision at that time was to be the dominant force in convenient food. So it wasn't about restaurants at all. So that was a good place for me to start. And so what we did is we started dropping these Taco Bells into airports and colleges, and it didn't work because we were operating them, and it was just too thin a margin in somebody else's environment. So then we realized, well, we just should license it and let them operate because the benefit will accrue to them. So that unleashed, literally 2,000 restaurants later, we had a couple of things going. One is all these college locations, which just blew the brand wide open because we got people when they were forming their brand loyalty in college. And that's what really, put Taco Bell on the map. And then the second thing is we figured out we could throw a Taco Bell inside a KFC. So all of a sudden we had two brands that are better than one. And especially for, lighter population density, when you can't afford to build one restaurant, you actually can afford to build two together in one piece of real estate. So now there's 1,000 of those, whether they're KFC Taco Bells or Pizza Hut Taco Bells around the country, mostly in less. And the other great thing is you can bring your brand to a small rural market that normally wouldn't have access to Taco Bell. So, all that was great. Then another opportunity of all the different things I did at Pepsi was we really got into alternative beverages, we called them, right? So soft drinks had run their course. It was time for all these new alternative beverages that were healthier and more interesting. And so I got to run the joint venture between Pepsi and Starbucks. And we had, believe it or not, it was called the North American Coffee Partnership. And that was actually a third silent partner, which was the Dairy Farmers of America, who made the product for us and had a great deal of pride in terms of Frappuccino. So
how interesting.
Invested $50 million in building 3 plants so we could have national distribution, one in Mechanicsville, Pennsylvania, Springfield, Missouri, and Ventura, California. And these were expensive. These are pressure cookers, it was retort. Yeah. So you basically, coffee and milk don't get along, high acid, low acid. So you have to bake them together on a logarithmic scale and put them in pressure cookers. So one of the key pieces there is we created Double Shot because at the time Red Bull was taking off. And Howard and Starbucks, by all rights, said, no, we're the natural energy drink. We shouldn't let Red Bull have this market. So let's go after it. So we created Double Shot. Interesting backstory on this is that, sorry to name drop, but Howard wanted to name it Doppio for good reason, because he had an Italian convention on all the names on the menu, right? So
Makes
why
sense.
not? And fortunately, Ann Breeze, who was an amazing market research, did the research. So to bring Howard Faxon said, basically, at this time, Americans are still struggling with cold coffee. You start throwing Doppio into the mix, and this thing's going to go in the ditch. So, so anyway, we got that straightened out, and because the original format was in these really small slim cans, we could fit so much more in those pressure cookers. So the manufacturing efficiency just rolled. So it just was an exciting time to combine all these functional disciplines where it wasn't just about how do you sell this stuff. Like one of the things we did is we spent $4.5 million just sampling cold coffee to make sure people were comfortable that once you put the training wheels on it, milk and sugar, all of a sudden cold coffee is a pretty good thing, right?
And if you're spending $50 million to get the facilities, $4 million to testing just makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and then I got to work not only with Howard, but then the founders of Sobe and Adwala. So John Bello had founded Sobe. We called it fairy dust. It had all these different interesting herbs in the drink. So there was perceived functional benefit, even though. Yeah. And so what we learned about that is beverage development really comes down to 3 things, right? One is taste. It's got to taste good if it's going to sell. 2 is efficacy. If you're going to make claims, you should have enough that the functional benefit is there. And the third thing is cost, because you've got to have the margin to be able to really market the product. So after Frappuccino and Double Shot, we did the Sobe brands, and that a lot of different varieties there. One of the first major brands with all these different functional benefits. And then finally we did Adina, which is what we call the Drink No Evil. It was products that instead of marketing the positives, we eliminated the negatives, right? So there's no preservatives, no artificial colors, blah blah blah. So all this stuff is all mainstream now. But it was very fun to be on the front edge of figuring this all out. And Greg Stultenpohl, who was the founder of Odwalla, he started selling orange juice out of his microbus down in Santa Cruz, and then created Odwalla, the Odwalla Empire, which was pretty amazing. It was the first fresh product, on the grocery shelf, right? And then unfortunately he had a mishap where there was E. coli in the apple juice, and a couple of babies perished over this, and it just devastated Greg. But he had the wherewithal. Basically, he got advice and counsel, get the lawyers involved. And he's like, no, he went right to those parents and took responsibility, apologized to save the company. And the amazing thing is Safeway, who gave him all this space in California, which is the huge, juice market, held that space for him for almost 60 days, so he could go retool the manufacturing, so he could pasteurize the product.
Well, they really believed in it.
But again, just an amazing human being. And then the final chapter in his story is Calafia Farms, because Greg, was vegetarian. He had some liver challenges, and he created a lot of new plant-based foods and made it accessible to all sorts of people. And then the other technology advances, HPP, high pressure pasteurization. So now instead of cooking the product, which cooks the flavor out of it, you can pressure treat the product and get the same pasteurization with much greater flavor. So Greg was truly a pioneer, and God rest his soul. We lost him a few years back.
Yeah,
just a great pioneer.
It's unfortunate. Did he have a scientific background in that, or did he have a scientific background in the biochemistry of the food, or is that just a area he took a lot of interest in?
Good question. He was just a smart human. I got to work with him in a couple of different buildings, and his office was always a corner surrounded like a library. Yeah, he just read voraciously, and he was the real deal. He didn't like people that were making, excuse my expression, who made shit up. Right, he was the real deal. Yeah, and so he researched it, and he went. They wound up buying this plant down in Schaefer, California, and putting in the HPP and making a big bet on it, and it turned out to be a smart bet. So he educated himself on the whole process. And then the other thing that Greg always did is surrounded himself with people, the manufacturing side of the business. Good question.
Right. Yeah, having the right team in place makes an incredible difference, especially when you're doing things at this kind of scale that you're talking about. So,
So.
Well, amazing journey. And all the products that you're talking about, I remember, in college having Taco Bell. I remember those first Starbucks, cans to go, and the Odwalla juices I used to buy. So you've been taking a little history of my beverage experiences too. So.
Yeah, glad we could be a part of your lifestyle for all those brands.
Yeah, absolutely.
So then we got to turn to restaurants, right? Beverages.
That's right. Yeah, so got into the restaurant side.
Yeah, so obviously Taco Bell, got me into it. I was a gearhead. I always worked at gas stations. I never worked in a restaurant, right? So I had kitchen anxiety. And it's an interesting thing. I see it now. I call it kitchen intimidation. Not everybody's cut out to be a food service person, right? Kitchen's a unforgiving place, right? It's fast paced, it's dangerous. You really have to be on your game. But anyway, so I wanted to, graduate into a full-fledged food guy. So after Taco Bell, I had the opportunity to go to Jamba Juice, and Jamba was a tale of two cities. It's an incredibly powerful California brand. When I joined the company, we had 350 smoothie shops in California. It started in San Luis, and unfortunately, the limitations of the brand. One is it was an indulgent treat. It wasn't a habitual, thing. So we had two tasks at hand. One is to try to make the occasion more habitual, because at the same time we were refranchising a lot of stores, trying to move to a capital light model. And when you franchise a concept, some of these franchisees weren't prepared to be able to operate something as volatile as smoothies. I mean, it sounds simple. How hard can it be to run a smoothie shop?
Right.
Well, it's not even seasonality; it's weather. I mean, you can get crushed one day when it's 90 degrees out and everybody's got smoothie on the mind, and then the next day it's cold and rainy and no one's showing up.
Nobody wants it. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really hard to figure out how to flex your labor and food cost. Now, fortunately, Jamba's supply chain was IQF, individually quick frozen fruit, because we literally had to buy fruit all over the world, follow the growing season, but you had to freeze it, so if you get it through the supply chain. So the interesting story at Jamba is we got caught. Well, it was Mr. Toad's wild ride, because the first thing is, right after I got there, McDonald's decided to get into the smoothie business. You can imagine. But that's a great story of, it could have been a disaster for us. It turned out to be the best thing that ever happened, because having McDonald's market smoothies was more than you could ever ask for. I mean, they just blew the category open. So they created
the adoption of it just kind of sped the process up.
Yeah, so all we had to do was figure out how to fulfill it. So they helped us out a lot. And then I'll name names. Nectar came along, and the cold pressed juice craze. And back to efficacy, the truth be told, blending fruit gives you more efficacy than cold pressing it, but you lose a lot of micronutrients and fiber when you cold press. So the consumer didn't know that, and it was too complicated a story to tell.
Sure.
And we got caught because given we were frozen supply chain, moving to fresh to get to vegetable juices just screwed us up, right? We didn't know how to manage the waste or any of that. But happy ending today. Jamba is a lot more focused on the nutritional value of the smoothies. And the second thing we had to do was get food. So if you look at that category, it's a difficult task. A smoothie can be very caloric,
right?
Even if you don't put any extra sugars in it, right? The fruit,
just the fruit alone,
calories, right? So putting a meal together with that was tough. So anyway, so those two things got worked out. That's the Jamba chapter, and from there I wanted to go full-fledged back into food, but I forgot Peet's along the way. The story behind Peet's is a fantastic brand. It's now owned by JAB. It got sold for $1 billion, which, if you would have told me that when I joined Peet's, I would have what? But the reason it did, the dirty little secret behind Peet's, not only was it great coffee. So I'll tell two little interesting tidbits. Most people don't know that Peet's and Starbucks were one company. What happened is the founders of Starbucks, Gordon Bowker and Jerry, I don't remember Jerry's last name. They, Alfred Peet, who had a little roastery in Berkeley, and there was a rumor that he had an affair, which is why he also opened at Stanford. So he had Berkeley and Stanford, two coffee shops. And his whole thing was about beans. It wasn't about beverage. So the Starbucks guys always admired him. So they finally bought Alfred Peet's Coffee. And at the time, Howard Schultz, who was the director of sales at Starbucks at the time, came back from Italy and loved the whole espresso, the beverage side of coffee. And he said, "Guys, you got it all wrong. It's not about the beans; it's about the beverage." And they said, "No, I don't think so." So they sold Starbucks to Howard, and the rest is history. Fortunately, both companies thrived. But in the old days, Peet's, over 50% of Peet's sales were in beans.
Interesting.
Yeah, and we had several varieties of beans from all over the world. So What else behind Peet's made it successful? It was omni-channel. So first it was multi-channel, and then today it's omni-channel, right? It's every channel.
Right.
So what Peet's did magnificently, and I can't take credit for this, I just helped scale it. We had 5 different businesses. A lot of people didn't know that. And at the core was our cafes, right? And then from there, we got into the DSD business, direct store delivery of fresh beans to grocery stores. So all of a sudden, our bean business thrived. And it was because of this DSD network that we set up. And we had, full-time employees, we had independent contractors, we had broadliners. Anyway, we get the beans to stores. And we started in specialty stores. And then pretty soon we were mainstream. We were Safeway, Kroger, everywhere else. And so that was a big part of it. The other thing is, Peet's, like I said, started at Berkeley, Stanford, but delivered mail order to every state in the U.S. and 44 countries around the world. So all we had to do was click the switch and convert that to the internet and create a subscription.
The business model was already there. Yeah, just had to change the format.
You just have to, digitize it, e-commerce it, whatever you want to call it. But now that business at Peetnik loyalty program is one of the best ever. Is you get fresh beans delivered to your house, and you can adjust the quantities, and you can get beans from all over the world, and it's fantastic product. So and then we also did office coffee, so higher end being in the Bay Area, we had all the tech companies and their price sensitivity when it came to the coffee in there.
Sure.
They didn't care. It certainly wasn't going to be Folgers or something like that.
Sure.
So that was good. So anyway, Peet's was omni-channel was kind of the big aha there. And then I'll quickly fast forward to the end here to get to the whole delivery business. So then I went to Moe's Southwest Grill, wanting to get fully mainstream. And, along the way, we raised our kids in California, and the nest had emptied. So after Pepsi always telling us where to move, we finally got to move where we wanted to. So we actually got an opportunity with Focus Brands to go to Atlanta, and Moe's at the time was about 750 restaurants on the Eastern Seaboard, 120 franchisees. So kind of intense process. And Chipotle had pioneered the category, right? And then there was Jamba in the West and us in the East. And so, again, it was a high growth environment, but that growth was starting, the organic growth was starting to subside a little bit. So we had to find new ways to grow the brand. So that's when we got into delivery and catering in a big way. And Moe's is just a great brand for catering. And so when online ordering came along, Moe's jumped on it and took advantage of it. And made our franchisees very, very happy and very successful. And, catering's not only great because you get big checks, catering's great because if you do a 10-person catering, you're probably going to introduce your brand to 1 or 2 people who've never experienced it before. So it was a great
it's a great promotional angle too.
Paid sampling doesn't get any better than that, right?
Yeah, exactly. I love that perspective.
So that's the Moe's story, and fortunately that prepared me for what would be this whole new world, which is online ordering. And got a call from Reef Technology, which was a SoftBank company, a $2 billion unicorn. First $1 billion they used to buy the 2 largest parking lot management companies in North America. Second $1 billion was developing 20 different use cases to deploy on those parking lots. So really interesting real estate model. I was fortunate enough to be on the ground floor to build the kitchen side of the business, which was the first use case because it was the most challenging, food perishable. So, and again, talk about, we had the money to burn, so we went fast. It was all about share. We opened 23 different markets around the country. Found and build commissaries in each one to service, and these are all mobile units that were deployed on parking spaces. Basically, we had to pay the parking lot companies. We leased the parking spaces, and on average, nationally, an average parking space yields about $350. So as long as you could pay $350 in rent per space, we took 3 of them. because our mobile units were only 8 by 24 foot. And so that's incredibly cheap rent to be right at the corner of Main and Main, right? So all we had to figure out, which was no small task, is how to get utilities to it and how to keep the food safe from them. But the other thing there is we got into multi-brand kind of by not completely by chance, but kind of backed our way into multi-brand because even though those mobile kitchens were pretty small, they had all the equipment in them, so you could serve 6 or 8 different brands out of the same unit. And we called them neighborhood kitchens because what we were really doing, fortunately, Reef was really good at analytics. They used a lot of BI, and we used every piece of data we could get our hands on to determine what do we put in that unit. You know, what cuisines do people like? What's the share look like? Who's the supplier? And how can we fit in there? So, and that was also fantastic because we were working with, because this is kind of a theme too, it's just when I get to Crave here is not just, there's the B2C side, which you certainly have to have the franchise concept. You have to have the consumer, right? But the B2B side is equally important because you have to make sure your operators can operate well and make money at it. Yeah. And the cool part of the initial work at Reef was working with, we call them local heroes. These local mom and pop brands that had a loyal following.
Yeah, that have big followings.
Yeah,
dedicated.
Your earlier point about pandemic, man, they were disoriented, right? And they needed help because all of a sudden it wasn't about their in restaurant business; it was about out the door. So we were a convenient way to help those mom and pops, get good at delivery fast, so they could take advantage of the pandemic. So
excellent.
That was
right place, right time.
Long and winding road. So now, as you mentioned, I'm the co-founder and CEO of Crave Kitchens, and Crave is my second or third bite at the apple. As much interesting work and innovation we did along the way to try to serve the online community, just like Airbnb in travel, or Netflix in entertainment, or Amazon in retail. When you go through digital transformation, it takes more than a few pivots to get to the ultimate model, right? Who'd have thought when Amazon came out with ebooks, they were going to sell? I don't know. I heard some number. I think they have over 370 million items or something like that. I mean, you can literally get anything from Amazon, and you can get, I live not too far from a distribution center, and I'm sure you probably experienced it too. I can literally order something at 10 in the morning and have it by 2 in the afternoon. It's uncanny. Yeah,
talk about a disruptive market, right? Like, you can still be at your computer and still have the same similar experience of going to the store and getting it right now. Without the inconvenience.
Yeah, I've always been a person that needs to try on the shoes or whatever. But anyway, it's fantastic, and we need to do the same thing in food. And again, food's there's 2 reasons food hasn't happened as quickly. And again, this is just my opinion. Yeah. One is that our check is small, right? So the internet really started with hotel rooms and airline tickets and more expensive checks. So we were $20. So it took the internet a while to find its way to us. And then the second reason is because it is perishable, and it has a time fuse on it, and it makes the logistics of it. And not to mention the safety. And knock on wood, we Americans are not lucky, but privileged to have a very, very safe, national food system. We all have had food illness now and then from a bad restaurant, but for the most part, you don't have to sweat that too much. But you don't take it for granted when you do online food. You're right. Yes,
it's a rarity that happens.
Yeah. So Crave's key to differentiation was multi-brand. So now instead of going to DoorDash and Uber Eats and getting a hamburger or a pizza, and that's all you can get. When you go to Crave, you can get top 10 cuisines, and you can mix and match your favorites. So if you want egg rolls with your pizza, have at it.
Go for it.
And we didn't really know it initially whether or not consumer really wanted multi-brand. We assume so, but it's been moved now because we average 2.5 brands per order. So people really like to have multiple things. And you think about, we had a family of 5, and we had a vegan, a vegetarian, a pescatarian. So
a lot of people to please in different ways.
Yeah. So forget about their culinary taste, even their dietary lifestyle issues, right? So a family of 5 typically has 3 to 5 different needs. So it makes sense that we do 2.5 brands per order because
that's a good point.
And that's just one example. I mean, whether it's empty nesters that husband and wife that don't have any kids anymore, or friends that hang out and party together and food is social, all those things, really having multiple brands is a huge advantage. So
even in the office setting, when we order off lunch for the office, just everybody coming to a consensus is near impossible. So
no, it is. And even back at Moe's, Mexican was, at least you could have some variety within Mexican, because you had tacos and bowls and various proteins, and people could kind of customize their own food. So it was always somewhat advantage to catering. But now have Mexican and pasta and Asian and pizza, it doesn't get any better than that.
Right. We have a Thai restaurant here by us that, obviously the menu is primarily Thai, but they do also have hamburgers and french fries. So whenever we order from the office, there's at least 2 people that go the hamburger route while everybody else is getting, pad thai and curries. So.
Yeah, it is. It's pretty amazing. And if you date back in time, Domino's was the original ghost kitchen. So pizza has always been, delivery favorite because it's a good carrier. You can top it with all sorts of different things. And then Asian was number 2. The Chinese takeout place always dominated delivery.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So why would that change? And there's a reason they did. So now in the digital area, you need to take advantage of that same benefit. So it's really cool to watch.
In Crave, are you putting your own brands within the kitchens, or are you bringing in other companies to set up shop within Crave?
Yes.
Okay.
The first thing we did, because again, it's all about margin and making sure the operator can make money.
Right.
So we love national brands or regional brands because they sell and they've had marketing behind it, but you pay for that in a license fee. So it eats away at your margin. So what we've done is to create, top 12 cuisines nationally, to create our own brands in each of those categories. And that way, since every order has 2.5 brands, chances are we're going to get a private label in there and a national brand. You mix the 2 together, and all of a sudden you got a decent margin.
Right.
And everybody gets what they want. And it's that old volume margin trade-off. One serves to drive the sales, the other serves to deliver margin. And you put them together and it works. Good question.
Yeah. And then what is your plan for extending this? Which are the next 12 months going to look like for you?
Yeah. So we're in that. We feel like we've finished the validation stage, and we've run out of pivots. To use term. So hopefully we've made every mistake in the book by now, and the rest is all success. So we feel like we're ready to move out of validation phase into expansion phase. And the beauty of the franchise business is it's somewhat self-funding. Every time you sell a franchise, you collect a franchise fee, and then you get this ongoing royalty. So it's a capital-light model.
Sure.
But still, it takes an upfront raise, which we're in the middle of completing right now. And our goal is to move from local to regional to national footprint. And the other nice thing about the franchise business is as your geographic footprint expands, so too do your multiples. So, you go back and look at Chipotle or some of the huge success stories in franchising. That's the road they went. And so that's our goal. So we want to be a national brand. We want to be disruptive, but it's not about putting other restaurants out of business. In fact, enough restaurant. I think in one of our previous conversations, I mentioned to you that somewhere between 80 and 100,000 restaurants went out of business during the pandemic, which is just a sad thing.
Right.
Those are mom and pop families.
Yeah. exactly.
So obviously, and since I've been in, I feel like, I owe a debt of gratitude to the business since I've been in it my whole career. So I'd really like to help these operators have a sustainable business model where they can actually make money and deliver great food. So that's our goal, is to get operators into underutilized or previously abandoned kitchens and get rolling and offer these multi-brands. Now, fortunately, our model is a different real estate model. It doesn't require foot traffic, so we don't have to pay as much rent.
Right.
And then the other thing is, our whole industry, not just us, we started out with these huge commissaries with 15 brands side by side, which was all wrong. It was way too much capital, way too much rent, and no labor efficiency because we built walls in between teams. So, first thing we had to do was downsize the kitchen. Second is integrate, the labor, so that we could, and then the third was find, abandoned kitchens, if you will, that already had a lot of the investment made. So that's what we're redeveloping the restaurant business.
I love that. But even as you're talking, you're going through all these components of it. I'm just thinking about what an advantage to the mom and pop businesses to have access to not only cheaper real estate space, the technology that you're providing to them, any marketing that's coming out of it from the Crave perspective, and they can still deliver people the food that they love. I love the concept.
Everybody's got to eat.
Yes, everybody has to eat.
So we'll be there for you.
And multiple times a day.
Yeah, exactly. It's fuel, so we got to have it.
Yeah. So I know we're
which is
exactly
really the fun part of food, right?
It is, yes, and that, absolutely. The social part of it, whether it's again in an office environment or a family get-togethers, it is the thing that binds us. So. Yeah. And I know we're running out of time, but I just want to ask your thoughts on kind of where is the restaurant world going? I know that you're trying to be in here and disrupt pieces of it, but kind of what are some of the big trends you see or coming down the pipeline?
Yeah, I haven't talked it, but there's a lot of roadkill in our space, and it's unfortunate. Like I said, part of it's just the iterative nature of innovation, but the other side of this that my big warning here is that too many people came into this, trying to bring technology, and all they did was add cost, and they just suffocated the poor operators.
Right.
And the operators didn't have a choice because the consumer wanted to deliver, so they had to do it. And it cost them a whole lot more. And the people that were in there with their hands out collecting the money weren't adding enough value for the owners to get an advantage out of it. So I think that's my major negative, and I think the industry has to get smart about helping the operator make money. And we haven't even solved the three little problems with delivery. Right? The deliveries still don't show up on a Friday night at your favorite pizza joint in less than an hour and a half. Chances are it's got the wrong toppings on it. And then the third thing is it costs too much to do more than once a month. So on the consumer side, there's still work to do. So we're focused on that.
Yeah. Actually, yes, big problem. I think a lot of Americans certainly are feeling all of those things that you just described. In our family, we certainly do. And we definitely have that debate of, do we order out? Do we go pick up? Do we cook? What is going to be the best use of time and money in this instance?
Yeah, the average American 70% of Americans don't know what they're going to have for dinner as late as 4:30 in the afternoon, and that's where the problem starts. Us. Right? Like you said, what are we going to have? How are we going to get it? Are we going to cook it? Are we going to go get it?
Yeah. Absolutely.
We want to eliminate that complication, make that a little easier decision, and then take away all the trade-offs.
Well, then I think you have a winning business model on your hands.
All right.
Well, Bruce, thank you so much for this. There's so many more questions that I could ask you today, but maybe we'll have you back and we'll do another session. Much to talk about. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you again. Take care.
Okay, you too. Bye.